What else happened in the 19th century? Well, across the entire world there were expositions held, where according to the official narrative, governments decided to build extensive exhibitions of massive intricate structures to allegedly showcase technology. The entire narrative around these expositions is dubious to say the least. Firstly, the explanation for these amazing buildings is that they were temporary, built from cardboard and plaster and the like. Now, apart from the fact that none of these structures give the appearance of being temporary, being painted white presumably to mask their true age, even these temporary constructions would be impossible to design and set up in such a short space of time. The real reason seems to be to give an excuse to destroy them after the event's finished. This process of gradual destruction has gone on ever since, where these palaces have been repurposed, had a false narrative created by AI and then renovated, meaning destroyed or deliberately damaged. Practically every Tartarian structure on the face of the earth has fallen victim to a fire, and sometimes several fires, where the structure was either earmarked for subsequent demolition or remodeled completely. A significant characteristic in the stories of these structures is that more often than not, it's claimed not to be the first building on that exact site, in some cases claiming multiple demolitions and rebuilds in the same footprint. I'd urge everyone to watch a documentary pointing out many of these anomalies, Old World Order, but be careful which platform you choose. As mentioned, the relentless state censorship is creeping into every outlet, where even platforms previously allowing free speech are now being clamped down on or bought up, to control the narrative. At the moment there's Odyssey, Rumble or BitChute, but even these are experiencing the tentacles of control creeping in. This documentary illustrates the photographic manipulations mentioned, and also has a fascinating excerpt regarding one particular exposition. A main building of one of these events is officially classified as being designed and erected in the early years of the 20th century, but a panoramic photograph taken almost 40 years before that date clearly shows this structure already there on the horizon. Ask yourself how it is that today we build simple block structures that take years to complete, that suffer subsidence or complete failure with our state-of-the-art technology. Then ask how it is that these masonry structures, weighing thousands of tons, have no construction issues whatsoever, being perfection of geometrical construction, presumably surveyed for foundations. And here's an anomaly: there is indisputable evidence to show that, not only is the footprint of the structures solid, but there are a network of tunnels beneath them, possibly connecting these structures over thousands of miles. Now all of the information contained in the last few paragraphs is common knowledge to possibly hundreds of thousands of people across the world, the results of diligent research of several independent, curious contributors, but the conclusions drawn based upon them vary wildly. However, many researchers agree that the only logical conclusion is that previous cultures were massively advanced technologically to us, and that a worldwide event, probably 200 years ago or longer, allowed a tiny group of people to take advantage and subjugate the rest of humanity ever since. The missing parts of the story are the fine details and who these people are. This speculation depends largely on trying to excise the conditioning from our psyche and using pure intuition in the absence of first-hand testimony. So let me give you my thoughts. If we did have superior technologically advanced civilizations, then yes, we can see the structures left behind. But how can we explain the total absence of relics of things like factories, cars, cinemas, airports in that civilization? Well, ask yourself why these things were created in our plastic era in the first place, and you'll realize that they are all specifically designed for our control, inventions and creations that a socially emancipated, empathic culture would have no need for, or at least not in the form we have today. We have factories to develop the trinkets of a capitalist culture, televisions, furniture, cars, etc. If we think of practically every film ever produced, they deal with the same theme: domination and subjugation piped into every home. Every narrative has at its heart the struggle against oppression or bullying of some kind, where an enemy is exerting their selfish intent and we're encouraged to engage and identify with that culture of oppression. The vehicles for issuing that message are television and cinema, and our entrapment in a usury system is dependent on slave labor institutions like factories. So why would a previous culture that didn't have a need for slavery and control have those structures at all? Isn't it also the case that if our plastic culture from the last couple of centuries disappeared tomorrow, then nothing would remain, because we've only created these simple, brutalist structures that decay in the blink of an eye, not amazing palaces as these previous cultures had? The concept of travel holds an interesting phenomenon, that of the airship. We're all familiar with images of the airship in flames, and the assumption that we didn't develop that technology because of its inherent danger, right? Well, ponder for a moment the basic concept of comparisons between the air travel technology we use today and that airship technology. If we didn't have to consider the supposedly dangerous possibility of sudden combustion, wouldn't the airship be a far superior alternative? People are surprised to learn that passengers weren't only accommodated in the small gondola underneath the airship, but that a huge area of the lower portion of the airship itself also accommodated hundreds of passengers. Compare the aeroplane, with its necessity to reach high speeds in order to take off, and then essentially be a guided missile on approach to landing. It's a metal tube containing a relative handful of passengers, requiring many aeroplanes to accommodate the capitalist routine, with the dangers of mid-air collisions and refueling. Now think of the airship, where several hundred passengers could travel in safety and comfort over long distances. But there's the spontaneous exploding danger to face, isn't there? How many aeroplanes have crashed, and did we abandon that technology as a consequence? The details surrounding the Hindenburg disaster in 1937 are suspicious to say the least, and the dramatic commentary accompanying it reek of it being a false flag event, in other words a staged event with the goal of influencing public opinion. Our everyday lives are a constant theater of conflict, whether it's the Middle East, terrorists or other nations competing with each other. On top of that, there's the dangers of being mugged or murdered, where we need constant surveillance for our safety, and Hollywood gives us a relentless feast of fear to seep into our subconscious. We haven't the time to truly deliberate on the reality of our world, because we spend every waking hour working to put food in our bellies and a roof over our head, under a barrage of media fear stories until the day we're allowed to stop working, and keep our heads down till we die, where we still live under constant threat of nuclear attack, deadly viruses or the environment decaying due to our reckless behavior. Would normal, well-adjusted humans devise these narratives if they didn't exist? It comes as a shock to the majority of people to learn that aspects of our world that we've taken for granted since childhood have absolutely no basis in evidence or fact at all. At the risk of suffering the reaction that all truth seekers have endured these last few years, I'll introduce a few of them to you, but be prepared to listen and not simply turn away as we've been programmed to do. So let us look at the official version of how we and everything else came into being. The story goes that around 13 billion years ago there was nothing. Suddenly there was a spontaneous explosion where everything we know was created in embryonic form, coagulating into various forms as it expanded. Eventually everything settled down into mostly globular lumps and cooled, one of which was the Earth. Around 4.5 billion years ago, small organisms apparently magically formed that evolved through phases, branching into different species that at one point had enormous reptilian creatures dominating the planet. 65 million years ago an event wiped them out, followed by the gradual evolution of mammals that evolved into hominids, apes, which ultimately resulted in us. So, we have a population that originated from slime on an insignificant rock in the vastness of space, constantly under threat of being smashed with debris from that initial explosion, while spinning and orbiting around a massive ball of fire, which itself is hurtling through space. Would it surprise you to know that there is no evidence for any of this whatsoever? Our belief in this model is purely on the word of those we've been indoctrinated into believing without question. If someone speaks eloquently in front of a blackboard with equations that we don't understand, or makes reference to studies carried out by research institutions, then we simply assume that these wise minds have done their due diligence on our behalf. The reality is that ideas are put forward as hypotheses and supporting evidence is then proposed to back this up, being sanctioned as proof by the administration of these institutions. Did you know that there's never been a dinosaur skeleton found? The typical method of introducing a new specimen into the record is when a single bone or small collection of bones is discovered, and then speculation on where these bones go is decided essentially by a committee. The missing bones are then extrapolated from these finds and a model made, probably by the same factory in China that supplies almost every museum on Earth. As regards the theory of evolution, along with the history of dinosaur hunting, the entire history is littered with fakery. It seems more than coincidence that the first discoveries of human or dinosaur bones only happened in the mid-19th century, when Charles Darwin's On the Origin of Species promoted the concept of evolution. Let's look at the official version of social development. The official view that we all have is that human nature is naturally aggression, selfishness and greed, and that civilized cultures have developed a system of democracy, whereby anyone can be put forward as a candidate to represent us at administrative level, but that this natural human nature occasionally spills over into conflict. Really? The mainstream view reinforces this idea that throughout history countries and individuals have been in conflict, with kings and emperors ruling over subjects, so that when we're indoctrinated into the official narrative we accept this ruler-serf situation as natural. An 11-year-old American girl recently discovered that every president elected to office was a direct relative of either the French or British royal families. I'm not a mathematician, but you don't need to be in order to see the impossibility of these odds. It gets crazier. It also turns out that their opponent on the other team was also a direct relative of either the French or British royal families. There's more. Out of the two opponents, the one with the strongest bloodline ties was always elected, really. Bearing in mind that most countries have the same red team versus blue team system, we can assume that this isn't confined to the USA. Even according to official figures, a tiny fraction of 1% owns everything on Earth via a handful of umbrella corporations, and we have a situation where millionaire politicians drive past mothers sleeping on the streets with their children, and no matter who is elected, the situation never changes but gets worse. The logical assumption is that we exist within an organized crime syndicate, with almost limitless funding and power that exerts its control over us from birth to death. The other assumption is that this syndicate is totally without compassion, care or any modicum of responsibility, and will lie to us about anything it can, in order to keep that control.